He thereupon commended himself with all his heart to his lady Dulcinea, beseeching her to succor him in his peril. And being well covered with his shield and with his lance at rest, he bore down upon them at full gallop, and fell upon the first mill that stood in his way, giving a thrust at the wing, which was whirling at such a speed that his lance was broken into bits, and both horse and horseman went rolling over the plain, very much battered indeed. Sancho, upon his donkey, came hurrying to his master's assistance as fast as he could. But when he reached the spot, the knight was unable to move. So great was the shock with which he and Rocinante had hit the ground. "God help us!" exclaimed Sancho. "Did I not tell your grace to look well, that those are nothing but windmills, a fact which no one could fail to see unless he had other mills of the same sort in his head?" "Be quiet, friend Sancho," said Don Quixote. "Such are the fortunes of war, which more than any other are subject to constant change. What is more, when I come to think of it, I am sure that this must be the work of a magician Freston, the one who robbed me of my study and my books, and who has thus changed the giants into windmills, in order to deprive me of the glory of overcoming them. So great is the enmity that he bears me. But in the end, his evil arts shall not prevail against this trusty sword of mine. May God's will be done," was Sancho Panza's response. And with the aid of his squire, the knight was once more mounted on Rocinante, who stood there with one shoulder half out of joint. And so, speaking of the adventure that had just befallen them, they continued along the Puerto La Peace highway, for there, Don Quixote said, they could not fail to find many and varied adventures, this being much traveled thoroughfare. The only thing was, the knight was exceedingly downcast over the loss of his lance. "God's will be done," said Sancho. "I do believe everything that your grace says, but straighten yourself up in the saddle a little bit, for you seem to be slipping down on one side, owing, no doubt, to the shaking up that you received in your fall." Sancho then called his master's attention to the fact that it was time to eat. This episode of tilting with windmills has been absorbed into nearly every Western language as a symbol of the folly of fighting with phantoms or illusions. Outwardly, this is quite true, but inwardly, it is the imaginative, heroic battle of the child or simple, two-dimensional man. This battle has also been described in terms of dragons, the monsters that every child battles within his interior landscape. Of course, there are no dragons, as everyone knows, but people fall repeatedly under the spell of a, quote, dragon that is a bad mood, usually originating in the unresolved psychological dynamics that men have with their mother complexes beginning in childhood. It is this heroic battle with windmills for Don Quixote, with dragons for another hero, with moods for a modern, that is being fought out. We may laugh and smile at the childish imagery of Don Quixote's battle, but on serious reflection, it is no more bizarre than our own 20th century struggles. This is probably the reason we have so much empathy for Don Quixote. He is ourselves served up to us in palpable form. In another story from this imaginative medieval journey, Don Quixote enters a village where he sees a castle on the skyline. He complains that a page should blow a trumpet from the wall of the castle to announce the coming of the one so high-born as himself. He imagines the horn call of a shepherd to be the royal trumpets announcing his arrival to the lord and ladies within. On the street he is met by several women of doubtful virtue, whom he hails as ladies of the court. A droll conversation ensues, in which they try to ply their trade, but he treats them as the imaginary ladies of his fantasy. His courtesy is so strong and convincing that the women of the street are momentarily transformed into the courtly ladies of his expectation. Don Quixote and Sancho are taken to the local inn, where they find the fare to be a sumptuous banquet befitting their status. Here again is the juxtaposition of inner reality and outer reality, with the inner vision triumphing over the outer. Three-dimensional thinking would find this story as ridiculous as the windmill episode. But viewed from the imaginative kingdom of the two-dimensional man, here are unshakable reality and romance and chivalry. The two-dimensional man lives in the triumph of inner reality over outer. I once took part in a Don Quixote-like episode that taught me this principle. A young man brought his current girlfriend to meet me. The meeting limped along very badly, with no one quite knowing what to say. I offered various bits of conversation, but she would have none of them. After a time of very awkward silence, she showed some interest in a lute that hangs on my wall. I put the lute in her hands, and the awkwardness was resumed. Finally, in desperation, I tried a Don Quixote-like venture of observing that the young woman looked just like a Florentine painting of a woman holding a lute. This touched the magic of the two-dimensional world in her, and I learned the wonderful fact that if one will treat a woman like a lady, she will respond by being one. The conversation flowed, and there was warm, interesting personal contact. My friend objected later, however, telling me that I had ruined their relationship. He complained to me that she was so busy being a Florentine lady holding a lute that she was interested in nothing else. Such is the power of inner truth. The story of Don Quixote ends on a somber note. After numerous adventures of faith and heroism, the Don and Sancho Panza return home. Don Quixote lies dying. He now has a moment of lucid insight, in which he sees that all his adventures have been unreal exercises of his imagination. He lays all this out before Sancho, who reverses his role and begins to argue that they should set forth again and begin a new search for Dulcinea. Surely this time, argues Sancho, they will find the sweet one and the nightly vision. Don Quixote dies. The last few hours of his life were lived as a three-dimensional man, part of the necessary movement toward higher consciousness. The true miracle of the story is the sanctification of Don Quixote and the Quixotification of Sancho. The Sanchification of Don Quixote and the Quixotification of Sancho. The true journey of knighthood and chivalry has drawn ego and shadow together to diminish the split in personality indicated by the difference between the two. Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, not much drama is made. Not much drama is made of this at the present level, but it will be crucial when we come to that intensification of the split personified by Faust and Mephistopheles. We will soon see an example of another hero, Hamlet, who will spend the last moments of his life in the higher stage of consciousness, in which he is capable of that four-dimensional man. Cervantes and Shakespeare occupy most of the same lifespan. In fact, they both died on the same day, April 23rd, 1616, by the Gregorian calendar. Don Quixote was published in 1605, and the first edition of Hamlet was probably published in 1603 or 1604. It is as if the two men stood back to back, Cervantes looking backward and Shakespeare looking forward. Cervantes pointed his genius backward and illuminated the medieval consciousness that was just ending in Europe. He constructed Don Quixote, the unwounded, unself-conscious man of unshakable faith, the man for whom everything works in poetic terms outside the vicissitudes of reality. Cervantes spoke of the childhood of Western man who had not yet suffered the shock of being expelled from the Garden of Eden. No better description of two-dimensional man can be found. Shakespeare, in Hamlet, looked forward and made a statement about the modern man who was to come. It is to that play that we now turn for insight into three-dimensional man.